Oh, hey Jim, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. And the first question that I ask everybody is, how do you like your coffee in the morning?
So I'm going to do a chai tea latte because I'm not a coffee drinker. So I'm one of those odd individuals. Crazy as this sounds, I've actually never even tasted coffee in my whole life.
And what was the non-appeal to coffee?
I don't like the smell, first off. And I know that sounds so weird because I think that's what attracts most people to drinking coffee in the first place. Everybody in my family drinks coffee, but I am the oddball, and chai tea latte is as close as I can get.
Interesting. Did you know, I don't know if you know this or not, actually, if you don't like the smell of something, that is actually the first signs of an allergy or an intolerance towards a product or a food. And I'll give you an example. I'm celiac, so I'm actually allergic to gluten and dairy, but toast smells horrendous to me.
Really?
And most people, exactly, it's the same reaction, get absolutely outraged. Oh my god, it just it doesn't smell nice at all. So I have zero desire to then want to have that toast or bread that that's being cooked, because I know my body knows it's allergic to it, essentially.
That's interesting. I'd never heard that before.
Yeah, it's a little unknown fact, but it's so anybody who says like they really force themselves to have something that they just hate the smell of, don't push it. Really, don't push it, because that's one of the first indicators. But I could digress, and I could go on as a foodie, and that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about what it is that you do and why do you do it.
So we are in the data-driven marketing and analysis business, I guess. Our firm's going to be 39 years old in October, so we've been doing this for quite some time. And fundamentally, we really haven't changed. Obviously, as marketing has changed, we have adopted. But I'm the CEO of the company. We consider ourselves a data analytics boutique. And we've got about 15 folks spread across the US that support our business, and we're in a variety of different industries. We actually started in financial services in our founding back in 1986. We migrated into hotel, hospitality, tourism business for a while. We've worked with colleges and universities on admissions campaigns. We've worked with veterinary practices. Quite a variety when you really think about it. There's always the one-off, right, that you don't expect. You work with a company that makes or builds bridges, tunnels, and tollways. Wasn't a business that we intended to get in, but kind of found ourselves in that one. So a variety of industries with a core of several.
And that's why I was obviously excited for you to come on today, because there are not that many businesses that surpass 20-year mark, never mind the 30 and 39, and approaching your 40th year. Are you doing anything to celebrate those 40? Because it's a huge accolade.
It is. I've been thinking about that, and I have to say I have not landed on anything in particular, but I'm intrigued by what we could do. You're right. I mean, it is they're few and far between, certainly of our size, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of exceptionally large Fortune 100 and multinational brands been around for a long, long time. As a small firm such as ourselves, we were at one point in time 330 people. We actually sold the company at once back in 1999, and then ended up buying it back afterwards. And so I just feel good about having lived through a couple difficult times, recessions, worldwide pandemics. So here we are. We're chugging along.
That's one of the parallels we're going to draw on today. Is as we were just kind of talking before we started, we're seeing a lot of uncertainty in the market. Like I said, we haven't quite got the data yet on what is that causal effect that's actually going to happen to us as small businesses. And, that's one thing, is the economy. Then we've got AI, we've got technology that's coming in. And like I said, you came back to the data-driven analysis, your boutique business. How has the fundamentals basically not changed over that span of 39 years?
Well, I think at our core, and probably the constant has clearly been data. Even if you just look at, well, the terminology has changed a lot, right? So when we first got in it, it was, people really didn't even understand what data was in the mid 80s, or the application of data analytics. So I think the fact that we have had data at our center for coming up on 39 years is absolutely something that hasn't changed. I think, as we said, the terms of that have changed. We're now in AI. Back in the 80s, it was just baseline data intelligence, and modeling even was still somewhat of a newer concept. I think what we've tried to do is be constant in recognizing that the application of data, while it has changed to some degree, is still the same, right? In terms of we all still keep track of things like age and income, and whether families have children or whether they're empty nesters, and
they're the sensors that have been around for millennia.
Right, exactly. And in our business, what we find is that it just hasn't changed, Charlie. They are highly predictive. They have been, and they remain highly predictive. The anomalies, I think, are whereas in the past we didn't have anywhere near the volumes of data, and we certainly didn't have self-reported data at the level we have today, right? So it was harder in the 80s and 90s. You had to go to credit bureaus to get data. Today, I'm not one who does it, but a lot of younger folks, volunteer every scrap of information for us to be able to consume. And so in a way, it makes our job both easier. And then, we now have over 700 different demographic attributes that one could potentially either purchase or append to an individual's file. Whereas back in the, in the Stone Ages, when I started, it was, if you could get 50 attributes, you were doing really, really well.
What are some of those more unusual attributes in that list of 700? Like people wouldn't even know about?
Well, there's obviously, we happen to have a normative data set of all of those attributes. And so, one of the things that we provide, because it's publicly available in the US, is voting record. And a lot of our clients say, I actually don't want to know how people vote, so please remove that from the file that you send to me. But we have, because in the States, again, DMV data, right? Each of the states' vehicle information is publicly available. You can get down to a very granular level of the year, make, model, 4-door versus 2-door, the type of engine that's available in a vehicle. A lot of people don't, think they know that. You can get to religious interests. Again, these are all self-reported behaviors or attributes, demographics. So, you can identify the type of what the primary language is that's spoken in a home. You can identify someone's religious persuasion. We talked about voting record. So I think there's a lot of things that, when you scrape below the surface, you can acquire subscription data. So, if, for example, if someone's a runner because they subscribe to Running Magazine, now maybe they just
we have a Strava account,
Right, exactly, yeah. So
let's take a little bit about around kind of privacy, because some people might be thinking, wow, I had no idea that this is all in the public, that this is self-reported. How are businesses able to use all of these different data attributes in order to do marketing, to do sales, to do e-commerce, whatever that is? Let's lift the hood up and let's make it this less scary for people and help them understand. So why is all of this, like you said, you're saying the word self-reported, give you an example of that, and then why is this data in the public domain, and then why can businesses use this information that's in the public domain to use it for marketing?
Yeah, I think probably the hardest question to answer there, why is it in the public domain, I think, to some degree is dependent upon country, right? So in the US, we have a long history of having this information be publicly available. What is not is, credit record, credit scores, that type of data is not. But I'll take ourselves, for example, and we are not an anomaly in the industry. There is all of these different data sets that are available from specialized list brokers that have, as their primary focus, collects this data. And so you can acquire things like subscription data. So I said, what magazines do you have? That has never been, protected data. You can look at contribution behavior. That's publicly available information. There are probably somewhere north of 400 different types of data sets that you can acquire from various list brokers and vendors that are out in the marketplace that are scraping all of this information together. You can subscribe to those, which is one of the things that we do. Then you have your governmental sources. So because there's a Freedom of Information Act, and there is available that information that is available across the board in terms of real estate transactions. So if a real estate transaction is published, then that information of the consumer that is making that purchase, some of that data that's associated with that, so you're confirming someone's age and income and address, all off of that data, which is publicly available. So it's not uncommon for folks, for example, to go down to the court. We don't do this, but for people to go down to the courthouse and look up information and really get an amazing amount of detail on individuals. And then there's truly self-reported information is that which is provided by the individual, either in a survey, a registration for, a vehicle, a purchase that you made, a warranty card. That information is actually batched and resold. So you bought a washer and a dryer, or you purchased something and you filled out that warranty card. That information is aggregated and sold publicly so that you can get affirmation that, I bought a weed eater or a lawnmower or something like that. So you naturally know those interests. So there's, as I say, there's a lot of different sources. And then, there's NCOA. So the US Postal System, for example, routinely you can subscribe to have data that you maintain on your own database updated on a regular basis from the US Postal System.
So I sit in the camp, because it's really helpful, because I sit in the camp of have my data, good luck to you. Just as long as you give me a personalized marketing back, so I actually get to see the things I want to see, that I want to interact with, I'm like, sure, go for it and have it. But say you didn't want that. Can you get yourself removed from these lists? Can you get yourself, can you almost clean up what's your data that's in the public domain? How would you go about that?
Yeah, so there's a variety of sources in the US that you can do that through, right? So all of the credit bureaus have the opportunity for you to remove yourself from having any of your data resold, which is basically what's occurring, right? That data, as I talked about, there's 400 different ways or companies that make that available. So you can block that. As you well know, with mobile devices, that's changed the whole landscape for us. And so you constantly see iteration occurring with the manufacturers of all of the handheld devices, building in software that makes your privacy easier to be able to block, if you will. And so, all of that is opt-in and opt-out in the US, and GDPR is exactly the same way. But, what we are now allowing for people to do between, accepting or rejecting pixels and cookies and everything else protects your privacy. There was an interesting study that Deloitte did about 2 years ago where we've all become familiar now with a pop-up that when you open a new website, right, it kind of is the disclaimer. This is the information that's being tracked on your behavior. You can either accept or reject that. And so they did a study of a little over 1,500 of the top multinational corporations in terms of the acceptance or rejection rate. 82% of people that are presented that pop-up do absolutely nothing. I just found that astounding, right? So we all scream and complain about, my privacy is being invaded, but all you have to do is reject it. Or if you don't get a reject all, yes, it's a couple more clicks where you actually have to go in and see what specific data is being collected on you and what you want to do if you opt out. But I think companies in general worldwide have done a good job now of adhering to all of those practices and trying to make it as easy for the consumer to opt out as they can. So there's a lot of different things that you can do. Starting with the bureaus is the easiest one. If, for example, a lot of people say, I don't want any of my kids' information to be offered up. And, I think, again, in the US in general, we're very good about following, not just we RMG collectively as an industry, those of us that are in the data business, about following those strategies. And then, we've gotten away from telemarketing calls. If you think back in the day when we first started, there was only two direct-to-consumer channels. There was direct mail and there was telemarketing. And there was such an outcry about the fact that everybody got a phone call at 6 or 6:30 at night when you're sitting down to dinner and hated that call to come in. And it was like, don't answer that phone, right? So in the US, we passed legislation that it's called the TCPA. It's a Protection Act for the consumer for telemarketing. And again, there's all these different options that you have available to you to opt in or opt out. Are they breached or broached at some point in time? Yes, they likely are. And, I guess that falls back on us as consumers to report those, because if we don't, then those practices will continue to proliferate.
And I love that you brought up the cookie pop-up and things. And so people know, because I obviously build websites. Google, I want to say 6 months or even 12 months ago, came out and said they vetted and partnered with a whole bunch of different companies and said, these guys are the best guys for helping you understand your data, protect your data, manage the data, segment it. And so it's actually a software called Cookie Yes, which is a Google partner that is a really super easy plugin to be putting onto many, many websites. And it has all of, like you said, the check boxes to say what you can give away and what can't give away. And from a marketer, it's really annoying because my Google Analytics then is affected and my Facebook advertising is affected by what you say yes or no. So I just almost want to just say that to just reassure, like, we're on the back end side of things, looking at this data and using this data. These guidelines are being followed. These practices are they're in place to make you have a much better experience and protect your privacy. So if you really, really don't, please press the reject button, because it does work.
Yeah, no, I think that oftentimes those of us in the broader marketing, advertising, data business get painted with a broad brush of you are hacking information, you're stealing people's privacy, all of this. There's always bad eggs in every industry. And I think in general, we collectively all work really, really diligently to not only follow, but to advance that privacy. I'm a consumer too, even though I'm in the data business. And so we want to make sure that we're following every guideline and being respectful. It's in the US, California was the leading state to be the first one out front, past, the California Consumer Protection Act. And subsequent to that, we've had 11 other states now that have some form of, if you will, a higher bar of requirements in collecting consumer data. And I think that before long, we'll probably see the rest of the states to some degree fall in line. I think a lot of us are concerned about having the government come down with a kind of a ruling that says you can or cannot do this. That will dramatically impact all of our lives, I believe, negatively. I think the way we're doing this on a state-by-state basis, while it makes it more difficult, because a lot of my clients say, well, if I'm going to market in California, can I do this? Or if I'm going to market in Virginia, or yes, it's harder to navigate the landscape, but the laws are out there. They're readily available for folks to be able to read, to follow. And so we've got a lot of things in place, I think, to protect the consumer.
Oh, exactly. So we've mentioned a few things already: modeling, segmentation, personalization, and also using data for good. First, just give me some quick definitions. I'm not a big fan of jargon names. I like to keep things simple. What do we mean by modeling? What do we mean by segmentation? Start with those two.
So modeling is to say that if we've got 50 people in a room and they are our very best customers, we want to understand what is it about those 50 people that we can then use to overlay on another set of 50 or 100 or 1,000 people. So, for example, they're all 50 and over. They all make over $100,000. They all live in, coastal cities. Whatever attribute, data, demographics rise to the top, we will model off of some defined set to identify a lookalike, a clone. All those types of terms are interchangeable. Segmentation is when we say that we've got a data set of 50, and now we want to understand what are the various segments within that 50 or 100 or 500 people, right? So what are the age breaks down? That's a segment. What is their ethnicity? That's a segment. What's their gender? That's a segment. How many of them have kids? That's a segment. So that's rudimentary when we get into data modeling and analytics, especially predictive analytics. So we've done a lot of work in financial services. And one of the things that we found is the best way to predict the likelihood of response of a product or a service is to look at the core segments. So is it more predictive, more likely that an individual that's over 50 will take this product than a person that's under 50? So we want to apply segmentation and modeling to that so that we can get a better response rate or return on our investment from the marketing dollars we're spending to attract that individual.
I love it. So let's, okay, now we've got the definitions. We know how we analyze it in that predictive data. What's some practical uses of this, of how businesses have been using this approach?
So I'm going to tie back to an earlier point that you asked about here. So I mentioned we started in financial services, and back in the 90s in particular, there was a flood of financial institutions that were looking to use modeling and analytics to identify their target audience. So what we called clone or lookalike. So if Jim Harenchar is our he has a credit card, he has 2 or 3 credit cards from us, and we want to find more people that are just like Jim Harenchar. So we would take the institution's data, we would expose all the existing customers to all of the demographics, not being prejudiced in any way. So we can't predict what might be highly responsive. So, maybe it is age, maybe it's kids. But one of the interesting things that we found when we work with one institution trying to sell equity lines of credit was that 71% of their people that were current customers drove an SUV. Now, had you asked me at the outset, would that be a predictive data point? I would have said no. But if you are unbiased and you simply expose the data to all of the different attributes that are available, and there were others in there as well, but the one that jumped out at us because it was so kind of out of the ordinary was to have that high of a percentage of a particular vehicle type associated with someone that had an equity line of credit.
Wow, that's insane. And so but then what was the next steps then? So they go for SUV, great. What was the next step?
So now you are looking for the broader prospect market. And so they had a list of a couple 100,000 people that they were going to both email and send a piece of direct mail to. And having an SUV was one of the attributes that we wanted. So we excluded everyone that did not have them with a small test cell that did it and did not, right? So that we could, kind of validate the findings that was a predictive attribute.
Wow. And how does that affect the ROI on different marketing campaigns?
So our real value proposition since our outset, Charlie, has been going to clients to say, look, if you're going to mail, we'll make it simple math, right? If you're going to mail 100,000 pieces of direct mail, if you're going to do 100,000 emails, if you're going to expose 100,000 people to targeted digital advertising, naturally you want to find the folks that are most likely to respond to whatever your promotion, your offer, your messaging is. And so that's really what we have maintained as our primary source, is that if you were to just randomly drop 100,000 pieces of mail, send 100,000 emails, today we've actually decreased our general response rate in the US to around 1%, almost under 1%, about 0.75 to 0.85. go back now pre all of our social platforms. If I sent you direct mail, there was a time the average response rate was 3 to 4%. Again, you only had telemarketing direct mail, so there were a lot less channels that we were all consuming. Today, it's eroded down to that level. But if you apply modeling, you can typically double that response rate. So now we're going from, let's just say again, 0.75 to 1.5. That's significant when you start to add up the number of responses. And it also, so it improves your ROI, to your question, right? It also reduces your cost per acquisition. So if we can take a set of 100,000 people and we say, let's overlay the model on that. So as opposed to mailing 100,000 emails or pushing 100,000 emails, we're only going to do 75,000. So we can reduce our cost and we can increase our response rate. So we've lowered our cost per acquisition. So our ROAS, as we say, our return on ad spend, is up significantly because we have narrowed the volume of mail and the expense we have, and we've increased our response.
And I wanted to make sure that was covered. So if I summarize why, one of the biggest mistakes I see in business is they might have an idea on who their ICP is, their ideal customer persona. They might then start creating the messaging, but they might have like 10 different product offers, and they might have 10 different ICPs, but they only have like one message, and they'll put that one message out onto all of the different channels, and then wonder why they're not really getting the leads in. And they're typically doing this on an incredibly small, tight, restrained budget on top of that.
Sure.
The rule of thumb is the more ICPs you've got, the more products you got, the more demand of marketing budget you're going to need in order to get the same to get results. Because like you said, if you're this channel, you're kind of working at 0.75%. I always say the industry standard for any channel is typically 1%. It's not always even. Like sometimes you can get PPC up to 2%, meta ads to 1.5%, but we're talking incredibly small numbers from that top of funnel.
That's right.
So if you can add an incredibly personalized message to that singular ICP that's going to really resonate with them, and you can then you can almost do 10 different campaigns to 10 different segmentations because you're really speaking to that person, you are going to get a much better response because you're giving them a much better experience as well. So there's a whole much of more qualitative attributes here as well. They might not need to buy it now when they received that direct mail, that flyer, but they might keep it because they might say, I might need this in 6 months' time. And I felt like this message was really personal to me. And I give you an example. So a tactic we do in the UK is sending little postcards out that literally with their name, with their actual address, and it's saying, hi Sandy, blah blah blah. It's a real personalized message to them from the data. And this is a really poor example, but because it looks like a postcard, it doesn't necessarily look like a flyer. It's like a postcard that you get from your friends and your family, and then see, it's from a brand. It's a far more welcoming experience than almost being spammed all the time by constant noise, so to speak.
I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah, there's a lot of evidence that, from time to time, a lot of clients will say to us, "Are people still doing direct mail? Isn't that like a buggy whip?" And I think certainly as we just noted, the response rates have declined. But the other side of it is you're getting direct mail from the new doctor in town or the new dentist that, just moved into the strip mall not far from you as an awareness builder, and they work. When you think about the number of emails all of us get and the amount of messaging that we're exposed to in a day, it's overwhelming. And so everyone is trying to break through the clutter. And one of the things that is still a consistent in the United States, at least, is we go to our mailbox. We have to physically get that out of the box. We have to do something with it, right? We may stand over and I'm guilty of this, we may stand over the trash can and go, don't need that, don't need that, don't need that, but we're touching it, right? How often do most of us now, I think the last number I saw is 77% of consumers review email on a mobile device. And if you're like me, again, I go through all of them. I'm like, doot, 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 doot. I'm deleting. I don't even read it, right? I look at the subject line or who it's from and out. So at least direct mail forces you to interact with that postcard, that letter, that oversized mailing, and it's working. Otherwise, it wouldn't be done.
Well, just an example, like it's a little segue. So I always like to get to know my postman. So mine's called Louis, great guy. But he was laughing the other day. He was like, "You guys never get any mail," and I'm like, "Yes, that's on purpose." But then when we do get mail, like you said, and it is something of interest, it's got my attention because it's probably I don't know, we get 2 pieces of mail a week, if that. So if you're that 1 or 2 pieces of mail in my inbox, I'm going to see it. I'm going to give it attention because there's not that much clutter there. Right. There's not noise anymore. But let's like slightly pivot a little bit. So we talked a lot about like online and, direct mail. It's actually the very first thing I did in marketing 30 years ago. So I know it well. But what about like offline activities? How can we use data to almost follow our campaigns from online to offline?
I struggle honestly with the definition of what offline is anymore, because what I would have called offline at one point in time, I think some today would still, consider online, meaning that with tools out there, I don't know if you're familiar with something called Placer. We actually use Placer, but Placer, tracks your device movement. And so when you think you've got your phone in your back pocket and you are quote unquote offline, right? You're not doing anything. You're not looking at any digital device. Actually, your device is being tracked. And so, Placer, and let's take a strip mall, for example. You decide, I'm going to go out shopping. I need to get away for the day. I'm looking for a new pair of shoes. I'm going to spend a couple hours this afternoon. Well, if that piece of real estate, right, if that mall developer has Placer installed, they are identifying who you are, but not by name, but they know that there is, X number of mobile devices that are now wandering around that mall. And that's how those retail shops are tracking, right, foot traffic that's coming in and what percentage is making transactions and so on and so forth. So just to get clarity, I mean, to me, that I would have in the past said that's offline, right? But now that's, that too has become online in some regard.
Mm-hmm. And how, let's I know you do a lot in tourism. How would that also be applied into the tourism industry? I love just getting some stories out there and examples out there of different ways this can be worked.
Yeah, well, one of the things that the tourism industry, one of the reasons it attracted us was having such a strong data and analytics background. In 2015-16, I was asked to speak at a conference, and we talked about the application of data. I'll take my home state, the state of Virginia, that spends almost $30 million a year trying to build awareness and promote people coming to Virginia, right? Virginia is for lovers. We'd love to have you. And the state, however, doesn't really know whether Jim Harenchar in particular ever steps foot in the state of Virginia. They have all kinds of mechanisms in place to understand what the influx of tourism traffic is in general and what the impact is on the economy, but they don't know if Jim ever comes. And so, there is a time and a place for brand building, and they do that exceptionally well. That, as we refer to it, above the line advertising. And then kind of what we focus in is more the below the line advertising. If we're going to serve Charlie or Jim some form of digital messaging, how do we determine whether or not it's been successful? And so in tourism, one of the things that I think we're hoping to help accomplish is allow the industry to understand. And back to my story, a lady walked up to me at the end of the conference and she said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even know a lot of these mechanisms were in place." We're fortunate. We're granted money from our state legislature and we get about a 10% increase every year. And we hope that, whether it's through a spurious correlation or through actual data, that, our numbers are up, our occupancy rates are up, our visitation levels are up, but they don't know really what to attribute that to necessarily. And so everybody, in a rising tide, all boats rise, everybody takes credit for it. And the ad agency says, "Look at the great job we're doing. We're building brand. Look at all the people coming to the website, right? Our visitation levels are up." But what is it really? You don't know. So we're hoping to be able to provide different types of tools and techniques that allow those that are historically difficult industries to track return on ad spend, those tools that they can apply to get a lot better insight.
And it's amazing that she was like the lady came up to you. It was just like she didn't know that these tools and mechanisms were even available. And I'll give you a story from my side how I work it. So I have a property auction client. They're one of the smaller brands in the area because the other brands in the area are doing a lot of brand awareness, huge, and they are dumping thousands. So we needed to be a little smarter with our money to kind of cut through this brand awareness noise that was kind of happening in the area. Now they're a very established brand, nationwide and everything like that, but they just haven't been that savvy in filling that top of funnel. But what we ended up doing is using PPC, so Google advertising, to target a very small area with a search term. I want to sell my property fast. Just that one term of people trying to, in the northwest of England, go and sell their property quickly. Now, one of the data feedbacks that Google advertising gives us is it'll tell us which postcodes have got the highest impressions and got the biggest demand for that key term. So where are the areas who are trying to sell off their properties the most? So then using data from Meta advertising, we're able to then send a retargeting ad to those people in those regions, in those locations, and more specifically, this is where you saying all the different attribution points, not the people who are traveling in and out of these postcodes, but the people who physically live in these postcodes. And that is an absolute option to us to how we're able to segment people out. So rather than spending thousands and thousands and thousands, we are actually able to grow and scale a business at a fraction of the price, just because we're being highly targeted in the message, what we're trying to do, where we're trying to target, how we're trying to get to that person. And there is a few black holes in our end-to-end solution. So if you're able to then say that this person actually then blah 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 was connecting the dots, that's beautiful. But I think if we're going to look to the future, all of these black holes that we kind of, I call them black holes, dark socials or dark marketing, these areas where we can't see, those gaps are going to get filled up through the work that you're doing, going over time. So if you're a small business then, and we've talked a lot about different data attributes, how it could be used, and the practicality of it, how do you not get overwhelmed by all of this data? What's one of those tactics or tools?
Well, I think you do, unfortunately. I mean, there's so many things that you're probably exposed to in terms of, you got to do this, you got to do this, you can't do this, whatever. So it's overwhelming. I mean, I put myself in that category. I'm a small business person. I am not by nature a tech person. So, certain things catch my eye, and we all suffer from a little bit of the shiny new penny that comes across. Like, ooh, that sounds really cool. Maybe I should. We got to test that. I'd like to advise smaller business folks to recognize that there is no there's no one solution. If there were, we would probably all be doing it. And I think that we are big practitioners of the belief that there's a crawl, walk, and run theory, and marry that with test and learn. So by that I say, we've got a lot of clients who never really know. They think they do, but they never really know which channel performs the best. And they will have an ad rep that comes in that says, I've got this great deal, you ought to do it, whatever. And they're like, no, what should I test it? I believe in testing. I really do. And I think that you constantly should be testing and iterating and determining what works for you. And what works for you today may not work for you 6 months or a year from now. And that's the reason to continually be testing. But rather than heavy up in one particular thing, I always like to advise folks that if you don't have measurement in place, then you're guessing. And guessing is a tough way to grow a business. If you have measurement, even if it's informal, I always like to tell folks, do you have a database of any sort? And they always think, I can't afford Salesforce, or I can't afford whatever. And I'm like, well, let's just say it's MailChimp, or let's just say it's an Excel spreadsheet where you're a small shop, you sell soaps, and you have a nice little business, but you'd love to see it grow. Do you even know who your regular consumers are? Are you collecting information? Do you have a little take card that you could put up by the register and say, we'd love to put you on our, our loyalty list. Would you fill this out for us? You don't have to spend, thousands, let alone tens or hundreds of thousands building out a formalized database. Keep an Excel spreadsheet. It's a place to start. Start to understand who your customers are, where they're coming from. If you can gather some baseline information, even if it's just a first name, last name, email, and address, that's great. Some people might say, I don't want to give you my email address. Okay, fine, take their terrestrial address, right? But gathering all that information is a starting point. And then I think constantly challenge yourself to test new things. And you can sprinkle a low investment and determine whether or not it's successful if in fact you have the measurement tools in place. And Google Analytics is a fine place to start. I pick on them a little bit because I think that, it's now 20 years old and a lot of clients that should be doing better are not, as a result of, being too tied to Google Analytics. I think as a small business, it's a great metric because in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. It's better that than nothing. So I think if you can start to understand what different types of channels are performing better than others, again, back to the small shop soap owner, when you walk in, Charlie walks in, oh, how did you hear of us? Right? Just even if it's anecdotal information, it validates where you're putting your budget. So I think collecting that information is the first place to start. Continuing to do test and learn, right? Testing different channels. If something doesn't work, abandon it for now. You may not abandon it forever, but you might determine, hey, we thought we were going to do, we wanted to do some heavy up targeting with Facebook in this particular market. But when I ask people, no one tells me that they saw us on Facebook. So I might cut my budget that I was testing on that and I miif reallocate it somewhere else.
It's such a good point because it's like, if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm not a data person, if you're the ideas person, you're super, super creative, love problem solving, great. That is its own its own skill and should be protected. But it's that thing of, if you haven't got the best technology in 2025, you haven't got the best technology for your vision, and you're not growing your database or understanding and using and being data driven, this kind of goes nice full circle here. You're not being data driven, go and find somebody or go and ask a friend who is more like-minded. If, like you said, if you're just starting out, go and ask your friend, go and ask a family, really get them to really roll your sleeves up and really learn just enough to get you to the next level before you can then hire somebody. Then if you're more of an established business, who in your team is making sure that you've got the best technology, because that's like saying about Google Analytics, it is 20 years old now. Is that actually might be the right tool for you to be understanding and using your data? And then finding somebody who's just going to be so accountable to understanding that data. So when you have all of these creative ideas of, hey, let's do some Facebook advertising, let's go and experiment over there, let's be a little bit magpie, allocate that budget to say 10% to be magpie, to be experimental, to find out the new ways of kind of getting new business. You're not going to be wasting that money for months and months and months because the data has just said, hey, that Facebook advertising is just not working. Everybody is actually coming through the direct mail this time because it's a local coffee shop, and the word of mouth is just spreading in the neighborhood that you've got a great product. Do you feel like that's a pretty solid summary of like we're setting up all the systems?
I do for sure, and one of the things I always pick on with big companies is and a lot of this happens in the tourism industry, and it's a part of it. And so there's a time and a place for everything. But I tend to pick on influencers, and I see clients, for example, that have this is a real example. So a client has a $3 million budget, and they just decided to spend $800,000 on influencer marketing. And I don't know how many, I'm going to assume a lot of your audience understands that, but if not, it's somebody that, in the tourism industry, for example, you pay them to come to your destination, spend a couple of days with you, you roll out the red carpet, and then they're going to write an article about you and how great you were. And I think that's wonderful. But if I don't see that article, if I don't follow that influencer, my question always is to my clients when they're doing that is, let's assume for a minute it was wildly successful. How would you know? How do you measure that? Right? And they'll say, oh, well, people walked in and they said, we saw you on such and such, and, she was so over the top. Great. Now you at least have a data point. But I think in reality, too many people don't ask that question. They can't make that association between the impact that the influencer had. And my question is, if it works for you, great, keep doing it. But I see a lot of people that I think spend a disproportionate percentage of their budget in that because their peers or somebody told them this is something that you need to do. If you're not truly measuring, or you don't have the infrastructure in place to measure that, then I think that was a bad investment. But that's just my opinion.
No, I love it. I love it. And I want to, as we kind of draw to a close on today's podcast, because there's been so much juicy things, what is that one pragmatic a piece of advice or implementation that they can action straight away and really start benefiting it from in the next 24 hours when it comes to their data, handling their data, or even just how can they be smarter with their data when they're looking at campaigns?
So I'll give you a couple things. I think first off, as I mentioned, just the practice of capturing data, if you're not even there yet, obviously crawl, walk, run, right? You've got to capture the data before you can assess the effectiveness of any marketing that you're doing. So it doesn't have to be a massive investment. MailChimp for a small business isn't terribly expensive. It allows you to be able to import. You've got to have something to put in there, right? So that's why you have to capture information. You have to know who your buyers are. But I think that's step number one, is the ability to do that. And then I think regular measurement of that. So hold yourself accountable to say, whether it's quarterly or biannually, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to look at who are my more frequent buyers, and am I touching them to, if they bought, let's say, twice in 6 months, could I get them to buy a third time? Testing for those people that have been in your shop more than once, buying your product online more than once. Is there a way for me to engage with those so that they feel special and that I can get that incremental sale of one more opportunity? So I think those are two of the baseline things that I would do. And then I think continue to, test and learn. What are the channels that may work for you? And the great thing about the application of digital marketing in our environment today is if you decide that, say, I'm going to boost a post on my LinkedIn, or I'm going to, invest in a small test with Facebook at a lookalike audience, it doesn't have to be at, $5,000 or $10,000. You can have a small budget. You could test $250 and see how it works. But I think making sure that you are tracking and measuring behind that. And in 2 weeks, the great advantage of digital marketing is in 2 weeks, you know whether or not it worked or not. It might have a longer tail, but the reality is with digital and this, if we're exposing them to the ad, typically within 24 to 48 hours, if they haven't clicked on it, they're not going to click on it. So you're going to know pretty quickly the success of your campaigns. And you can do that at a low investment level.
Absolutely. And I'll just leave one final thing, just more for the European audience here under GDPR. Now, I'm not a GDPR expert, but this is the one piece of advice I do keep saying. The reason why MailChimp is so incredible, it's incredibly low cost of handling data. Under GDPR, you are expected to handle, segment, and attribute every single piece of data that you're handling in a secure area. So an email database list, then if you put it into MailChimp, you say, right, I got this from Google. These are people I actually know. These are all my different clients. You've got different lists, and you can then say exactly where all these came from. You've done some massive ticks when it comes to European GDPR compliance straight away and at a low cost. Yeah, absolute low cost.
Yep.
Simple.
And that applies to the U.S. as well, right? Because you clearly have to identify that these people have opted in and are open to receiving messaging from you. And we worry about in the U.S. Well, again, the compliance level is not the same as GDPR. The difference in the type of opt-ins and opt-outs. But the fact that you've got that, to your point, I think is outstanding, regardless of where you're marketing, right?
Exactly. So on that point, I think that's a really great place. I think that's incredible. Really, really, really good pragmatic advice. So thank you so much. Thank you, Jim, for coming on today's podcast. It's been
Absolutely.
an absolute pleasure.
Yeah. I want to make sure that we let your podcast followers know that we do have our website that we'd love for you to visit, and we've structured something specific for your audience. So if they go to www.rmg, as in Robert Mary George, rmg-usa.com/with friends/ that's just for your listeners.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Absolutely. We're going to put that in the description. It's going to go out onto the different social media posts. So everybody, please take click on the link, go and visit Jim, ask Jim a bunch of questions. And Jim,
Absolutely.
where can they find you on LinkedIn as well?
Yep. So my profile is up there at, I think it's Jim Harenchar, not James. I probably should know that answer, but I think it's Jim Harenchar. And there aren't many of us in the whole world with a crazy last name like that. So please look us up, and love to answer questions, and we'll respond. So
Absolutely. I absolutely implore everybody to get in contact with Jim, because just all of we are only just scraping the surface when it comes to being data driven for your business and using analytics and so forth. So please get in contact with Jim. Thank you so much again.
absolutely. Had fun.